Life's trials, though challenging, are opportunities for divine transformation. The Bible assures us that God uses our struggles to refine our faith and fulfill His greater purpose. Psalm 46:10. In the whirlwind of life's challenges, whether they be health crises, financial struggles, or emotional upheavals, we often find ourselves overwhelmed. Yet, amidst this chaos, Psalm 46:10 offers a profound invitation. Be still and know that I am God. This divine command is not merely a call to cease our outward actions, but to find inner peace and recognition of God's sovereignty. The concept of stillness in this context is transformative. It calls us to pause our anxious thoughts and frenetic activities, turning our focus away from our problems and towards the divine presence. The essence of this instruction lies in the reassurance that God is in control, even when our circumstances seem unpredictable and tumultuous. By practicing stillness, we align our hearts with this fundamental truth. Consider the story of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, as recounted in Mark 4:39-40. When a violent storm threatened to capsize the disciples' boat, they were gripped by fear. In response, Jesus rose and commanded the wind and waves, "Peace, be still." The storm ceased, and a great calm followed. This miraculous event is more than a historical account. It symbolizes the calming of the storms in our own lives through faith in Jesus. His command to the storm represents His authority over all chaos, affirming that He can bring peace to any situation. The story of Jesus illustrates that while we may feel engulfed by life's tempests, God's presence is a constant source of calm. The same divine voice that stilled the winds speaks into our own storms, assuring us that they too will pass. The key is to trust in this divine authority and to be still, allowing ourselves to rest in the knowledge that God is ultimately in control. Psalm 107:28-29 further reinforces this message. The psalmist writes, "Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He brought them out of their distress. He calmed the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed." This passage highlights that God is ever ready to respond to our cries for help, calming our personal storms and guiding us through our difficulties. It is a reminder that even in our most desperate moments, God's intervention is both powerful and comforting. Isaiah 43:2 offers another layer of assurance. It declares, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." This verse promises that God's presence will protect and sustain us through any adversity. By being still and recognizing this promise, we can find solace and strength, knowing that we are never alone in our struggles. Importance of prayer. In the face of life's storms, whether they manifest as health issues, financial difficulties, or emotional struggles, starting our day with prayer is a profound way to seek solace and guidance. Prayer acts as a lifeline, connecting us to God and providing strength to navigate through our trials. This spiritual practice not only lays our burdens before God, but also reinforces our trust in His ability to transform our situations. The significance of prayer is vividly illustrated in the story of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, as described in Mark 4:39-40. When a severe storm threatened the safety of His disciples, they were filled with fear and desperation. In response to their distress, Jesus rose and commanded the storm to "Peace, be still." The immediate calming of the storm serves as a powerful metaphor for how prayer can bring tranquility to our turbulent lives. Through prayer, we invite Jesus into our storms, trusting in His power to bring about calm and resolution. Moreover, Psalm 107 to 28:29 underscores the role of prayer during our times of trouble. The psalmist writes, "Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He calmed the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed." This passage highlights that God responds to our earnest prayers, providing relief and guidance in our most challenging moments. When we cry out to Him, we are not only seeking His intervention, but also expressing our dependence on His divine help. The power of prayer is further emphasized in Philippians 4-6-7, which instructs us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This passage reassures us that through prayer, we can exchange our anxieties for God's peace. When we present our requests to God, we are promised a peace that surpasses human comprehension, an inner tranquility that safeguards our hearts and minds. Jesus calms the storm. Life's difficulties can often feel overwhelming, like a relentless storm threatening to engulf us. In these moments of turmoil, it's crucial to remember that Jesus has authority over all chaos and can bring peace to our lives. The story of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, as recorded in Mark 4:39-40, serves as a profound reminder of His divine power and the comfort we can find through faith in Him. In Mark 4:39, we read about a fierce storm that arose while Jesus and His disciples were on a boat. The disciples, terrified by the tempest, woke Jesus, pleading for His help. Jesus responded by rebuking the wind and commanding the sea, "Peace, be still." Instantly, the storm ceased, and a great calm followed. This miracle is not just a historical event, but a powerful illustration of Jesus' authority over all forms of chaos in our lives. His ability to calm the storm demonstrates that He holds supreme power over every turbulent situation we face. This biblical account is a reminder that Jesus is not just a figure of history, but an active presence in our lives. The same voice that silenced the winds and waves is available to us today. When we are engulfed by our personal storms, whether they are health crises, financial struggles, or emotional hardships, we can turn to Jesus with the assurance that He has the authority to bring calm and resolution. By invoking His name and trusting in His power, we align ourselves with divine peace and stability. Additionally, the story of Jesus calming the storm prompts us to examine our own faith. In Mark 4:40, after calming the storm, Jesus questions His disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" This question challenges us to reflect on our own trust in God's power and promises. Even amidst the most daunting trials, Jesus encourages us to maintain faith, knowing that He has the ability to bring about calm and deliverance. The authority of Jesus is also affirmed in other scriptures. For instance, in John 16:33, Jesus assures us, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." This verse reminds us that Jesus has already triumphed over the adversities and struggles we face. His victory provides us with the confidence that we too can overcome the challenges in our lives through His strength and authority. Please comment number 1 before hearing all this from God. Isaiah 43:2. In our journey through life, we often encounter daunting trials that test our strength and faith. Whether these trials come in the form of physical illness, financial struggles, or emotional distress, it is essential to remember that God's protection and presence are steadfast and reliable. Isaiah 43:2 provides profound comfort and assurance during such times. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. This verse speaks directly to the essence of God's protective nature. The imagery of passing through waters and walking through fire signifies the intensity and severity of the trials we may face. Just as waters and fires can be overwhelming and destructive, so can the challenges in our lives seem insurmountable. Yet, God assures us that His protection is absolute. Even in the midst of these trials, His presence remains constant, preventing us from being overwhelmed or consumed. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, as recorded in Daniel 3, vividly illustrates this divine protection. These three young men faced persecution for their unwavering faith in God, defying King Nebuchadnezzar's decree to worship a golden image. As a result, they were thrown into a blazing furnace. However, God's protection was evident as they emerged unharmed, with not even the smell of smoke on their clothes. This miraculous deliverance demonstrated that God's promise in Isaiah 43:2 holds true. His presence can shield us from the destructive power of life's trials. Similarly, the story of Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel 6, reinforces the message of God's protective power. Daniel, despite the king's edict, continued to pray to God and was consequently thrown into a den of lions. Yet God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, preserving Daniel's life. This divine intervention exemplifies that, regardless of how dire the situation may appear, God's protection can defy human expectations and safeguard us through our most perilous circumstances. The assurance of God's protection is not limited to dramatic biblical events, but extends to our everyday lives. In Psalm 91:14-15, God promises, "Because he loves me, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him." This passage underscores that God's protection is closely tied to our relationship with him. By acknowledging his name and calling upon him in times of trouble, we invoke his promise of deliverance and honor. Psalm 107:28-29. The Bible provides powerful assurances of God's readiness to intervene and deliver us from our troubles. Psalm 107:28-29 is a poignant example of this divine promise. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He calmed the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed. This passage not only reflects God's ability to provide relief, but also his closeness to those in distress. The imagery of a storm being calmed to a whisper and the sea's waves being hushed conveys a dramatic transformation from turmoil to peace. This transformation underscores God's power to bring order out of chaos and to provide a sense of calm amidst life's fiercest trials. It illustrates that no matter how overwhelming our difficulties may seem, God has the capacity to bring about a profound change, turning our distress into tranquility. The story of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, as detailed in Mark 4:39-40, serves as a vivid demonstration of this promise in action. When Jesus and his disciples were caught in a violent storm, the disciples, fearful for their lives, woke Jesus, who was asleep in the boat. Jesus then rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Instantly, the storm subsided and a great calm followed. This miracle shows not only Jesus' authority over nature, but also his willingness to respond to our cries for help. It exemplifies how, even in our moments of greatest fear and desperation, Jesus can bring about immediate and profound relief. Additionally, The story of the Israelites' escape from Egypt highlights God's deliverance during extreme distress. Faced with the Red Sea before them and the Egyptian army behind, the Israelites were trapped and terrified. Yet God performed a miraculous deliverance by parting the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to escape and leading them to safety. This account, found in Exodus 14, is a powerful testament to God's ability to rescue us from seemingly impossible situations. Psalm 34:17-18 reinforces the message of divine deliverance. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. This passage reassures us that God is not only aware of our suffering, but is also intimately involved in our rescue. His proximity to the brokenhearted signifies his empathy and readiness to intervene in our times of need. 2 Corinthians 4-8-9. Life's trials, while challenging, offer significant opportunities for spiritual growth and character development. James 1-2-4 provides a profound perspective on how we should view these difficulties. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. This passage encourages us to embrace trials not as burdens, but as instruments of divine growth. The concept of finding joy in trials may seem paradoxical, but it reflects a deeper understanding of God's purpose in our difficulties. Trials test our faith and develop perseverance, a quality essential for spiritual maturity. Just as a seed must endure the dark and challenging conditions of soil to grow into a flourishing plant, our faith must be tested to grow stronger and more resilient. One of the most compelling biblical examples of this principle is the story of Joseph, found in Genesis 37-50. Joseph endured a series of severe trials: betrayal by his brothers, wrongful imprisonment, and years of separation from his family. Despite these challenges, Joseph's faith remained steadfast. In Genesis 50:20, he reflects on his experiences and says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's trials were not in vain. They were part of a divine plan that ultimately led to his rise to power in Egypt and the preservation of many lives during a famine. This story illustrates how God uses our trials to bring about greater good and accomplish his purposes. Similarly, the Apostle Paul's experiences, as recorded in 2 Corinthians 4-8-9, provide insight into the role of trials in the life of a believer. Paul describes his own trials, stating, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." Paul's resilience through severe afflictions demonstrates that, although trials are intense, they are not without purpose. They refine our character and deepen our reliance on God, contributing to our spiritual growth. Another relevant example is the story of Job. Job faced extreme suffering, losing his wealth, health, and family. Despite his profound distress, Job's faith did not waver. In Job 42:10, we see the outcome of his trials. The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Job's story is a testament to the transformative power of enduring faith. His trials led to a deeper understanding of God and resulted in blessings that far exceeded his original state. Story of Joseph. Life is often filled with challenges that test our faith and resilience. In these moments of difficulty, it is vital to remember that God has a divine plan that is both purposeful and benevolent. The biblical narrative of Joseph, as detailed in Genesis 37-50, provides profound insight into trusting God's plan amidst trials. Joseph's story is one of extreme adversity followed by remarkable triumph. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and wrongfully imprisoned, Joseph faced numerous trials. Yet his faith in God remained unwavering. Despite these severe setbacks, God's plan for Joseph was one of eventual greatness and salvation. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph reflects on his experiences and says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This verse underscores the transformative power of God's plan, showing that even when others act with ill intent, God can use those situations for a greater purpose. The story of Joseph illustrates that our trials are not random or purposeless, but are woven into God's larger plan for our lives. Joseph's trials were instrumental in preparing him for a position of great influence in Egypt, where he would eventually be in a position to save many from famine. This narrative encourages us to trust that God's plan for us includes our growth and eventual blessing, even when we cannot immediately see the purpose behind our difficulties. Similarly, the Apostle Paul's experiences provide another perspective on trusting in God's plan. In Romans 8:28, Paul writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This verse reassures us that God is actively working through every situation, including the painful and challenging ones, to bring about a greater good. Paul's own life, marked by suffering and hardship, was used by God to advance the gospel and strengthen the early church. His faith in God's purpose amidst trials exemplifies how our struggles can be part of a larger divine plan. The story of Job also highlights the importance of trusting God's plan. Job faced immense suffering and loss, questioning why these things were happening to him. Yet through his trials, Job's faith was refined, and he ultimately gained a deeper understanding of God's sovereignty. In Job 42:10, we read, "The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." Job's story illustrates that even in our deepest suffering, God's plan involves restoration and blessing, often beyond what we could have imagined. James 1-2:4. Facing life's trials can be incredibly challenging, but the Bible offers profound comfort and assurance that God is always with us, even in the darkest moments. Psalm 46:10 captures this sentiment beautifully. "Be still and know that I am God." This verse invites us to find peace and strength in the presence of God, recognizing His sovereignty and support in the midst of our struggles. The invitation to be still is a call to pause and reflect on the divine nature of God amidst our turmoil. It suggests that in our moments of distress, instead of being overwhelmed by the noise and chaos around us, we should find solace in God's unchanging presence. This stillness is not about passivity, but about trust and surrender to God's will, acknowledging that He is in control of every situation. A powerful biblical example of this principle is found in the story of the calming of the storm in Mark 4:39-40. When Jesus and His disciples were caught in a fierce storm on the Sea of Galilee, the disciples, fearing for their lives, woke Jesus who was asleep. Jesus then rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Immediately, the storm ceased, and there was a great calm. Jesus then asked His disciples, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" This incident illustrates that even in our most terrifying moments, God's presence can bring peace and stillness. Jesus' authority over the storm reminds us that we can trust in God's power to calm the storms in our own lives, allowing us to find peace in His presence. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, And Abednego in Daniel 3 provides another example of God's reassuring presence during trials. These 3 young men were thrown into a fiery furnace for refusing to worship an image of gold. However, God's protection was evident as they emerged from the fire unharmed, with not even the smell of smoke on their clothes. The 4th figure seen with them in the fire is believed to be a manifestation of God's presence, demonstrating that He is with us even in the most intense trials. This divine intervention underscores the comfort and strength we can find in God's presence, even in life-threatening situations. Encouragement. One such promise is found in Psalm 91:4, which declares, "He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." This verse vividly illustrates God's protective nature, likening it to a bird sheltering its young under its wings. The imagery of God covering us with His feathers conveys a sense of intimate protection and safety. Just as a mother bird shields her chicks from danger, God promises to provide us with a refuge during times of trouble. This protection is not just physical, but also emotional and spiritual, ensuring that we find comfort and security in His presence. The story of Daniel in the lion's den, as recounted in Daniel 6, provides a vivid example of God's protection. Daniel, a faithful servant of God, was thrown into a den of lions as a consequence of his unwavering commitment to prayer. However, God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, and Daniel emerged from the den unscathed. This miraculous deliverance demonstrates that God's protective power can override even the most dire circumstances, highlighting His ability to keep us safe from harm when we remain steadfast in our faith. In addition to physical protection, Psalm 91:10-11 assures us that God's grace extends to keeping us from harm. "No harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. For He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." This promise underscores that God's protection encompasses all aspects of our lives, providing a divine shield against danger and disaster. The presence of angels as guardians illustrates the extent to which God goes to ensure our safety and well-being. Another powerful testimony of God's protective grace is found in 2 Corinthians 12-9. Where Paul recounts a divine promise. "But He said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.'" Paul's experience reveals that even in our weaknesses and struggles, God's grace is more than sufficient. His power is perfected through our vulnerabilities, providing us with strength and resilience to overcome challenges. The story of the Israelites' journey through the wilderness further exemplifies God's protective grace. Despite their doubts and complaints, God provided for their needs, guiding them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Exodus 13:21. This constant presence ensured their safety and direction, illustrating that God's guidance and protection are unwavering even when we face uncertain or difficult circumstances. Prayer. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. This passage encourages us to view trials as opportunities for divine transformation and growth. The transformative power of God's plan is vividly illustrated in the story of Joseph in Genesis 37-50. Joseph endured betrayal by his brothers, slavery, and imprisonment. Yet each trial was part of a divine plan that led to his rise as a powerful leader in Egypt. Joseph's trials were not in vain. They were instrumental in preparing him for a role that would ultimately save many lives during a famine. Joseph's testimony in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives, highlights how God can turn even the most painful experiences into blessings, demonstrating His ability to transform adversity into a greater purpose. Similarly, the story of Job illustrates profound transformation through suffering. Job faced immense losses and suffering, yet his faith remained steadfast. Job's trials led him to a deeper understanding of God's sovereignty and grace. In Job 42:10, we see the outcome of his perseverance. The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Job's story exemplifies how enduring faith through trials can lead to divine restoration and blessings, showcasing the transformative power of God's plan in our lives. In the New Testament, Paul's experience further demonstrates this principle. Despite facing severe persecution, imprisonment, and hardships, Paul remained resolute in his faith. In 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, Paul acknowledges the reality of his struggles, but also the transformative power of God's grace. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Paul's perseverance through these trials contributed to his spiritual growth and the advancement of the gospel, revealing how God uses our struggles to shape our character and fulfill His purposes. The Apostle Peter also provides insight into the role of trials in divine transformation. In 1 Peter 1:6-7, he writes, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Peter emphasizes that trials refine our faith, making it more genuine and valuable, and contribute to our spiritual maturity. God uses our trials to transform and strengthen us. Embracing this truth helps us find purpose and growth in every challenge we face. Please like this video so God will always be with you.